I'll start with Stacy's grandfather, Roy Wallace, who was born in Istachata, Florida, July 2nd, 1895. He lived with his mother and father and older brother Floyd till he was about 7, when his mother passed away of tuberculosis. Granddad took Floyd and our father Roy to a nearby orphanage, told them that he had to leave them with them for 2 weeks. He'd be back to get them. He took off and never came back. So he was left in an orphanage. They got Floyd a job living on a nearby farm, working. Floyd was about 12 or 13. So he lived in the orphanage till he was about 14. In those days, the hangings were public. So it was a big picnic day. Everyone would load up their horse and buggy with picnic items, take the family to see the hanging. When it came time for the hanging, when it came time for the hanging, like today, if someone is killed in a school car crash or something, they bring in psychologists and grief counselors for the kids. In those days, when it came time for the hanging, they would take all the kids, put them at the foot of the gallows so they could see the wages of sin. And so all the kids got to see the hanging up close. And so life was. For various reasons, he ran away from the orphanage at 14, was on his own from that day on. He used to poach fish with an older Negro man who had murdered his wife and 6 children. His house was on stilts and he buried the wife and 6 children under the house. After about 6-8 months, the hogs came and rooted up the bodies. So the authorities, of course, rather than waste good labor, they gave him life in prison at hard labor. Figured he'd have a life expectancy maybe 10 years. While working at a quarry, the warden's 7-year-old daughter fell into the quarry. She went right to the bottom, about 30 feet down. The black guy jumped in the water, swam to the bottom, found the girl, pulled her out, and they paroled him. So that's how my father hooked up with him, and they would go out dynamiting fish in order to eat. And one day my father had finally gotten a job on a fishing boat. He was out, and the black guy was throwing dynamite in the water. He went to throw it and he couldn't let go. And the fuse is burning down and he could not let go. But it blew his arm off right at his shoulder. But he lived. He was tough. And,
do they know why he couldn't let go? Just some kind of
just couldn't let
froze
go.
up and...
Yeah. So following that, he was a fisherman. He was captain of a fishing boat out of Punta Gorda, captain of a fishing boat out of Key West, and finally drifted into going to sea. He was sailing on merchant ships during World War I, which was very tricky. These ships were loaded with munitions, and they could not, they had no radar. The only thing they had were foghorns. And you hoped you didn't ram into another ship in that fog where you couldn't see 5 or 10 feet. Because if you did, there would be terrific explosions. 2 ships full of munitions would explode. And he spent the rest of his life until he married our mother, whom he met in London while she was employed as a waitress at a restaurant. And I think they married around 1933. Mother had been divorced. And
the 3 kids?
She had 3 kids, 2 died. One died of meningitis, her oldest, he was 11. That was Danny. The other was named John. That's all I know. He was an infant when he died.
1.5 years, pneumonia.
had no cure in those days for diseases, of course. So that's just a thumbnail sketch of the type of life he had. The McGaleys lived in Skerries, Ireland. They had, I've got a photo of the cottage they lived in. It's been torn down. But I'm making copies for your mother and Eileen when I get back. I got the photos from going around the pubs in Skerries with my second cousin. And long and short, Granddad had to leave Ireland in about 1911. And they told all the kids they left Ireland to find work. Actually, he had a pretty good job. He was a lighthouse keeper. And it wasn't until our Aunt Eileen became interested in genealogy, Aunt Eileen traced the McGaleys back to the 400s. She had it all documented
Wow, that's
in
huge.
church records.
Do you still have those records somewhere?
No. Larry was named executor, and he gave them all to her no-good daughters, and they don't know what they did with them. Well, now you know it. So the daughters just did away with them. There used to be a town Skerries and a castle Skerries. I mean, not Skerries, McGaley. Town McGaley, Castle McGaley. I could never find it, but it's probably been 800 years. But she had in Wales, yes. Mr. McGaley, actually Mr. Gailey, left Wales in the mid-1700s, went to Ireland. That's all I know. And they, when Michael McGaley, my grandfather, left Ireland, they told all the kids they brought them with them. They had 10 or 11 kids. I don't know if they weren't born by then, most of them, but they told them they left to find work. It wasn't until Aunt Eileen showed such a keen interest in family genealogy that Grandma, I can't think of her first name right now, but it's easy, I'll think of it.
Mary Jane?
No. Mary Jane McCann, who was the maternal grandmother. Although her maiden name was Downey. But anyway, he married, what he had done, according to Aunt Eileen, was they had what they called the black and tans in those days. Black and tan was a uniform worn by the British police. The British police were brutal. They treated the Irish terribly. And Grandma would not say what Grandpa did, but I'm sure he murdered a couple of black and tans, because if they had gotten their hands on him, they'd have hung him.
Mm-hmm.
So he fled to England with the family, and he could only take the most menial jobs, such as laborer, that type of thing. And it wasn't until Aunt Eileen was told by Grandma why they left Ireland that any of us ever knew.
No.
And so he spent the rest of his life kind of in hiding. They never caught him.
But some of the kids must have stayed in Ireland.
No, our second cousin her maiden name, I believe, was Carol. I've got photos of one of them who was rated Ireland's top golfer. And he and his brother emigrated to South Africa, where they were professional golfers.
That's different.
Yeah. And so anyway, he lived out his life. He died in 1955. He was 83, I believe, which is a ripe old age for those days. That was in 1955. And they never caught him. He had to always be very careful, keep a low profile. And he would take the kids up to Hadrian's Wall in Scotland. He loved Scotland. He loved Ireland, but he couldn't go back there. So he would take the kids up to Scotland. And like most Irishmen, he would recite poetry and teach the children about the fauna and different things, and tell them the history of Hadrian's Wall, which was built by the Romans in about the year 100 to protect themselves from the Scottish tribes. who were, of course, the Wallaces. And anyway, he passed away, and we have kept in touch with, God, I can't think of the name. What's the name of the two we stayed with in Scaries? Rooney, yeah, but that's it's Colin and Bernie. Bernadette is our second cousin. She was the daughter of our mother's first cousin. And they still reside, they have a big house in Scaries, right on the harbor. And they do very well for themselves. Colin has what I would term in our language the Roto-Rooter concession for Dublin and County Dublin. And some of those those sewers are over 1,000 years old. They were originally built by the Vikings who founded Dublin. And these two have had their genealogy tested. As far as I can tell, we all have about 40% Viking in us. I'm sure you got plenty in you. And that's a thumbnail sketch of the history of both sides of the family.
Yay, I love that. Thank you so much.
But they couldn't find much out about Benjamin Perry Wallace because they were looking for him. He owed child support. So he went to work for the railroad, but they never caught up with him either. Until it didn't matter anymore. You know, my father was 18 or 21 or whatever.
Oh, and he went back and supported that family.
Yeah.
Because he was making money.
Yeah. That's a thumbnail sketch of what you got.
Thank you.